wash the cups and saucers and brush the crumbs away. Shoos the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and creep. Make the fire, bake the bread, and earn her board and keep. That's a poem that always amazed me when I was young. It was written by James Whitcomb Riley, and it also reminds me of a little orphan girl that I knew probably 80 years in my life, and that was my mom. She was welcomed into a lovely home in Fremont, Iowa, and she worked for this home for her board and keep. I'm Elnora Norris, and I married my husband Lee, and we lived in Fremont. Between us, we were born and raised there, lived there our whole life. I taught school, and I retired when Lee became real involved in a purebred hog operation. So I retired, went home and helped him to raise hogs, do the paperwork, and the farm work. I wish to thank the Blakesburg Historical Society for having me come over and share my story with all of you. I'm really amazed at the audience here. It's just been a labor of love for me for the last 30 years when I retired and had some time to work on it. But the last 15 to 20 years, why we kind of put our bits and pieces together and made a story about the things that had happened. My daughter Leanne is here with me. She's going to run the pictures. And then I got one of my best friends with me today too. All the way from Florida, my sister Laura Miles. She didn't come just to see me though. She came to welcome a new great-granddaughter. My story is about the orphan train movement and my mother, one of the orphan train riders. The first train with 45 orphans aboard, Lord came on a train and they landed in Michigan in hopes of finding new homes for them. Transporting children from the East Coast in those days was not called the orphan train movement. It was called the placing out of children, and placing out era, I think is what they called it. It was actually the beginning of organized foster care in the United States. The orphan train movement was probably coined by some journalists in the early 20th centuries, but they didn't really use it in full force until about 1978, which wasn't so long ago. So this title was never used in any of their publications, which were very similar to this. Usually the heading was said, wanted homes. This happens to be what was in the newspaper when they wanted to bring children to Fairfield, Iowa. And I think we got one of the orphan train connections with Fairfield here today. In 1840, mass immigration was in progress all across America. And in the 19th century alone, New York, the early 19th century, the city only had around 40,000 people. It was a real young nation, America was, and we simply weren't ready for the huge influx of immigration. Jobs weren't plentiful, and if they could get a job, it just wasn't enough to live on. So the children were abandoned. Some were left on doorsteps, in vestibules, baskets, garbage cans, vacant lots, wherever they could leave them. If they survived, their only refuge was in an almshouse, which today we call poorhouses, and few of them survived there. In 1849, New York alone had roughly 3,000 children in both sexes living on the streets. But New York, of course, wasn't the only city along the East Coast that took in these immigrants. And the reason we talk so much about North New York was because it was the main port for these immigrants. ships. A lot of orphanages and juvenile homes and institutions and churches and everybody would take in these orphan children to try to help them all along the East Coast. Then the industrial age came along, and this just worsened the orphan problem because the families would move into the cities and they tried to find jobs in factories. Well, there was more children than there were factory jobs. So the factory owners could just pay a little bit of wage to them, and the fathers couldn't earn enough with that mere wages. So a lot of the mothers had to go to work. Therefore, they left the children at home again or on the streets. Some of them were locked in their rooms. They were left on the streets to sell papers or shine shoes. Some of them stole, some of them became criminals. Just all kinds of things happening to the children. The population grew to a rapid rate, and the children just became more of a problem in New York and other of the eastern cities. But this wasn't so with all the orphans. It wasn't so with my mom, because she lost one of her parents, and the other one just didn't feel like they could take care of her. There was a young theologian who graduated from Yale, Dr. Charles Brace. He didn't want to go into the ministry, but he became interested in the mission field, and he saw the great need of all these orphans in New York. He saw that they were not being cared for real good, and their food was not good. They were having diseases. So he, in 1853, along with city officials, they made a new society called the Children's Aid Society. And this society their main goal was to take these orphans, try to do something about giving them a nice home. Dr. Brace became the secretary of this organization, and his first year, he earned $1,000 for the whole year. He stayed with them for 37 and a half years. Now the West was being developed, and the farmers were beginning to break sod and making farms out of wildernesses. So Dr. Brace thought that this might be a place where he could send some of these children to teach them to become good citizens in their new countries. So in the year later, then Dr. Brace sent this group of children on a test run to Michigan to see if they could find new homes. Some of the homes for these children were very good, but a lot of the places the children were mistreated. And if their homes wasn't good enough for them, they had to go back to New York or go on to another town. This was the beginning of the orphan train movement, which really lasted for 74 years, and it ended in 1928. A lot of the individual stories of orphan train riders have been nearly forgotten, put in American attics. My mother, Lucy Warman, was born April 4th, 1894, the daughter of German immigrants, Mr. and Mrs. Max Warman. And 8 years later, she was in a home in Fremont, Iowa, with foster parents, Emma and Albert Springer, a long ways from her birthplace. When we were little, she told us that she was an orphan train rider to Iowa, but we really didn't know what that meant because we were little kids and we really weren't interested in finding out. She said she was born in Germany. She remembered the Statue of Liberty and the ocean, and she went to live with Aunt Kate when her mother died when she was a small baby. And Aunt Kate's name was Kate Mueller. She told us that Aunt Kate said, took her to the New York Juvenile Asylum, which was an orphanage, and said, I'll come back and get you. But Mother never saw her again. She rarely talked about her childhood, which I think was difficult for all little kids back in the 1900s. Basically, Frankly, that's about all we knew about Mother when she was little. As far as we know, she never knew her mother or her father, or if she did remember him, she never shared it with us. Being an orphan in those days was just something that people did not talk about. I don't think I ever heard her say anything about anything that happened on the orphan train when she rode one. Maybe it was something she just didn't want to remember, I don't know. It was simply not a pleasant subject for her, and she was real little, I gotta remember that. But when she was little, I was just a little skeptical about it. I just wondered if such a story could really be true. But unbeknownst to our family, my older sister, Maxine, helped Mother with some of her genealogy, trying to find out who her ancestors were, who her mother or father was, just anything they could find out. And when they researched what they could find, Mother had written letters, and she got answers to 2 really important letters, and had kept a picture when she was young. And those became very valuable to us in the later years when we started researching and trying to find out about it, which was a great now that we got the internet to help one. Maxine helped Mother write these letters, and she stored them in a notebook. And then when Mother passed away, Maxine copied all these letters and information and made copies for all of us kids at home. And it was practically all new to us smaller children. With other things going on in our lives, we were growing up and getting married and having our own families and our education. We really weren't too interested in finding out about our biological grandparents. We had foster grandparents. Did we need any more? So Maxine got really into it, and she was really interested in trying to find out about our grandparents. So, okay, I decided I would go to help her see if we could find out why her mother and father abandoned her and who were her parents. We really didn't know. So after coaxing from Maxine, she and I started going to orphan training reunions. And there was a lady in Iowa, Mary Ellen Johnson, who started the orphan training reunions. I think it was 1988. I'm sure we didn't go to the first one, but we did go to several of them. And there we found out a lot of orphans, much more than we expected. But we never ever could find out a name, Lucy Mueller. And by the way, I'll tell you that later. This made us all more interested in going and searching for Mother's name. And I don't really know when I started doing this research, whether it was 30 years ago or 50. It was just spontaneous, but the last 10 years, we probably did the most. I wish I'd have kept a better timeline of all that I did. At the age of 20, the first letter that Mother received an answer from was from her orphanage, the New York Juvenile Asylum. It told us that she did have an Aunt Kate Mueller. She did leave her at the orphanage because she had to go to work and couldn't take care of her any longer. The letter said that her parents were Mr. and Mrs. Max Warman. No mother's name, just the father's name. In 1952, Mom was about 60 years old, and she received a second letter from the Children's Aid Society. That was Dr. Brace's organization. They had taken over a lot of the problems of these smaller institutions. Well, they weren't small, but there was a lot of them that were smaller than the big Children's Aid Society. And this letter said that, yes, Aunt Kate had adopted her, left her at the New York Juvenile Asylum when she was 5.5 years old on December 8th, 1899, and gave permission to send her west. We don't think she was ever legally adopted, but she became Lucy Mueller. This letter also told us a little bit more that we were not aware of. If we were aware of it, we didn't pay attention to it. But it said she went to Manchester, Iowa on the train in 1900. I was not aware of this letter's news until after Mother passed away at the age of 80 in 1975. Still not knowing anything about her family, still an orphan, didn't even know her mother's first name. I tried to find death certificates for all of my grandparents several years ago, but unless you knew the borough that they died in and the year that they died, it was impossible to find it. My sister-in-law, Betty Steele, had researched sides of her family, and between her family and mine, her son David also became interested in helping me with this. He was a great help in researching on the internet. Since we couldn't find their death certificates, David said, well, why don't we try to see if they were married? So David got on the internet, found their marriage license on the internet, and said that Elise, age 18, that was her mother's name. It's the first we'd known of that. And Max, 28, were married in New York City in 1888. It said that Max was from Budapest, Hungary, and Elise was from Baden, Germany. He also found a memo that was entitled Vital Statistics, and this gave further generations of the family, the grandfather and the great-grandparents. Mother would have been ecstatic to have known that she had a family, because David then went ahead and found birth certificates for 4 children. They had had 4 children. Frida, the top one, 1899. Lucy, 1890. Alfred, 1892. And Lucy, 1894. There's no mistake, there was 2 Lucys. We think the first Lucy probably had passed away, because at the end of each one of these birth certificates, I don't know whether that's the way they are now or not, but at the end of each one of them, it tells how many children were born live, or how many were alive, and how many were living at that time, right? Is that right? And on the first one it said 1 and 1, the second one it said 2 and 2, but when Alfred was born, his said that she had had 3 live births and 2 were living. And when Mother's birth certificate was the last one over there, she had had 4 live births and 3 were living. So we're pretty sure that the first Lucy must have passed away. The certificate also told us that Mother was not born in Germany, that she was born in New York, which when she was little, she probably did see the ocean and the Statue of Liberty, and being a little girl, she probably thought she did come across the ocean. We don't know that. We decided that if she went to Manchester, like the second letter said, maybe that's where we ought to go to do some paper searching. So Leanne, my daughter, my sister-in-law Betty, and I, we drove to Manchester one summer day and looked in the microfiche there, and we found 3 articles in the paper said that 28 children, 20 boys and 8 girls were coming to Manchester on September 19th, 1900. And if you wanted a child to live and work at your home, you should meet the agent, Mr. Shields, next Wednesday at Clarence House in Manchester before noon. And you had to be there that day, because that was the only day Mr. Shields, the agent, was going to be there. When these children came to Iowa or other states, they sent agents with them, and the agent that come with moms was Mr. Shields. Dr. Clark, he also brought lots of children to the West. The children would be on display, and any expectant parent could come claim them if they thought they would work out in their home. All expenses would be paid, and there were no fees involved. And if they proved satisfactory, they would stay in your home until they were 18 years old. And if they didn't work out, They would just go on to another city or back to New York. I find it very hard to comprehend in this day and age how difficult it is to adopt a child with all the bureaucracy and the red tape that's involved. When not too long ago, anybody that wanted a child could just pick them up off of the stage, basically. A lot of the orphan train riders at these reunions said it's just about like going to pick out a puppy. I guess Mother was one of the lucky ones that day, because the third article, entitled 12 Found Homes, listed her name, Lucy Mueller, 6 years old, as one of the 12 orphans that had been adopted. She was chosen by Mr. and Mrs. Eliza Tripp from Manchester. Over the years, I have searched for her names in many books, and never could I find that she was an orphan train rider. I couldn't find her name anyplace. Being a skeptic again, I often wondered, did she really ride the train? And this gave us more proof. My sister then gave me a picture of the 28 children that she said came to Iowa on the orphan train with Mother. And it matched the number of orphans. It matched the number that was attached to the paper. This is the 28 children, and that's what they said in the newspaper. It came with Mother. There was 8 girls and 20 boys. It looked like it had come out of the newspaper, and I had never seen this picture until after Mother passed away, until I have no idea where it came from. I assume her foster parents had kept it and given it to her, I don't know. But it was proof that one and the same, that she was on the orphan train with 28 children. We assume that she stayed with the Tripps for around 2 years, as she was indentured to Albert and Emma Springer at the age of 8. She made her home with them until she was 18. Then she became Lucy Springer. They had to sign an indenture paper, and all that was is simply saying that this orphan could come live with you, work for their room and board in this foster home. And again, we never found any papers that said she was adopted, but they did change her name. They agreed to allow Mother 4 months of education each year. She was to be taught to read and write, to learn arithmetic, including compound interest, have a religious training, be taught to do housewifery, and was not to frequent drinking saloons, playhouses, or gaming houses. And when she left the home at 18, she was to be given $50, a new set of clothes, and a Bible. When boys left the homes, they were given a little bit more. I've read someplace that they were given $150. Mother was married in 1914 and spent the rest of her life with Dad, raising 8 children. She passed away at the age of 80 in 1975, still not knowing anything about her family except what I related earlier, and especially didn't know anything about her mother. About 2005, I joined the New York Historical and Biological Society to see if I could find out any more about her parents. I shared my story with a librarian there who had done his own family history, and we talked on the internet back and forth a whole lot. And he was really interested in my story because he had done his own story. Well, one day he called me up and he said, you know, I saw in the New York Times an obituary for Richard Mormon. And he has had 2 daughters. One was deceased and the other was still living in New York. He said, why don't you get on the phone and try to call her? He said it might be very awkward. So I did, and I don't know, it was probably 15 years ago, and I got on the phone and I said, I want to talk to this lady and she lives in New York. I had no telephone number or anything for her, and her daughter answered the phone. She told me that her mother wasn't there, but she would call me back, and she called me back that night. I have no idea now what we talked about, but we talked a lot. There was no awkwardness about any of our conversations. Then and in the weeks that passed, we never had any problems discussing our stories. After many, many pleasant calls and phone calls and exchange of addresses and emails and telephone numbers, I had a cousin that we decided that we shared the same grandfather. Later on, I found a passport for this grandfather, Max, stating that he went back to Austria. And several years later, he's come back to America with a new wife.
Can you pause the microphone?
Yes.
Patty, do you have those batteries?
Max.
You shared a grandfather.
That guy, yeah.
Okay, well, good. We've shared the same grandfather, and this happens to be my biological grandfather. We found a passport for him stating that he went back to Austria and came back to America several years later, with a new wife and a son. The son happened to be my cousin's father. He was the oldest. I then looked at a census report of 1900, I searched a lot of those too, and found that he was listed with his wife, his new wife, and he had 4 children in the home. 2 of them were mom's brother and sister, Alfred and Frida, and the other 2 were 2 sons from his second wife, Richard and Ted. And Richard happened to be my cousin's father. In a later census, Max was not listed in the census because he passed away, I think at 62, but his wife was listed. Frida and Alfred were not listed because they were out of the home by then, but listed was one of the 2 younger sons, and my cousin was there as a 3-year-old. My sister, Laura, who is here from Florida, Betty, my sister-in-law, my granddaughter Rachel, and I have met David in New York City, and we went there basically to take all the information that we had and show it to our cousin. And she showed us everything that she had. She was more interested, and we were too. We just had a real good time listening with her and sharing this information. Can you go back? This is my nephew David, my sister Laura, that's with me, myself, and my new cousin. My cousin could vaguely remember as a little girl my Alfred and Frida coming to visit the grandparents, but they had lived in California and they were actors, and she was only about 3 years old when they were in their 30s, so she don't remember too much about them. Many of my family have met now, a newfound cousin and her family, and we've visited with her many times in New York and also in Florida where she winters. I have found now my biological grandfather, a half-cousin, her husband, 2 daughters, a half-nephew, but nothing about my grandmother or my baby aunt. I've spent lots of money writing for death certificates, but nothing. Maybe someday we'll know more about it, maybe not. We're not giving up. But just a few months ago, my nephew came down to my house and he brought me a death certificate for my grandfather, which he just found on the internet. Now, we had tried to do that before, but he says that there's much, much more coming on the internet every day, and he had just found my grandfather's death certificate. Now that I've come this far, I stop and think what Mom must have gone through to have survived in 2 different homes and an orphanage before she was 6 years old. She had her name changed 3 times before she was at the age of 8, and finally spent 70 happy years around Farson and Fremont as a loving mother to 8 youngsters. Not knowing of any family except her Aunt Kate, Mother would have been as excited as we have been to finally discover some of her family in her early years as an orphan train rider. Over 250,000 orphans have been placed all over the West from eastern states. So in closing, I'd like to say I truly am blessed that she eventually lived to a happy life with my loving and caring foster grandparents. I will prove to be a great place for an orphan child to grow into a lovely young lady. Thank you all for listening. You've been a great audience. I might add that there is a national orphan train complex in Concordia, Kansas. How many of you have been there?